Psychological boundaries are critical for maintaining emotional well-being, fostering healthy interpersonal relationships, and ensuring self-respect. People with well-defined and balanced boundaries are better able to deal with interpersonal conflict as well as protect their own needs and values. But weak or overly rigid boundaries can lead to difficulties in relationships, emotional stress, and other psychological issues. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the different types of boundaries, some signs that you might have poor boundaries, and the 3-step process for building better boundaries. Boundaries are personal limits or rules that you set for yourself in different areas of your life. Boundaries help you define what you are and are not okay with in certain situations, relationships, or interactions. Boundaries help you protect your emotional or mental health by asserting your needs and values and ensuring that those needs and values are given consideration by others. Boundaries fall into several different categories, starting with physical boundaries. These boundaries define your physical space and your comfort with physical touch. It's your personal bubble, including how big it is and who can enter your bubble and how they can enter your bubble. This includes setting boundaries on who can touch you, if you're a hugger or not, or what is or is not okay in physical intimacy. There are also material boundaries, which are boundaries related to your belongings or your finances. This can involve setting limits on what you share, lend, or give to others, and it may include some stipulations related to those loans. An example of a material boundary might be, you can borrow my car as long as you bring it back with a full tank of gas. Emotional boundaries are about protecting your internal space, so your emotions and your feelings. This involves a few things. It involves being aware of your emotions or your internal state. It involves understanding what is emotionally activating to you and what level of emotional activation is unacceptable to you. People with good emotional boundaries are skilled at knowing when to engage or disengage from a situation or a relationship in order to maintain their own internal well-being. Time boundaries are my favorite, and this is about how you choose to manage your time, which can include how you spend your time and who you spend your time with. For some people, this involves setting aside time for self-care or hobbies or social interactions. Setting boundaries that clearly define work from non-work hours is an example of good time boundaries. Finally, there are behavioral boundaries, which involve your own personal code of conduct, as well as the behavior that you find acceptable or not acceptable from other people. For example, I have a behavioral boundary for illicit drug use. So if I'm in a situation where people are using drugs, I remove myself from that situation because that has hit a behavioral boundary. I also have a yelling behavioral boundary. If I find myself in a disagreement or a discussion with someone and they start to elevate their voice, I'm also going to remove myself from that situation because they have hit a behavioral boundary. The second part of behavioral boundaries is your own personal code of conduct. That is what you find acceptable or not acceptable of your own behavior. It's really nice when your personal code of conduct is in sync with your personal value system because there's a good amount of research that shows that when we act consistent with our value system, we have increased overall happiness and emotional well-being. Here are some signs that you might struggle with setting boundaries in your life. First, if you're constantly feeling burned out. People with poor boundaries often overextend themselves and find themselves taking on more and more responsibility, which can lead to chronic stress and eventually feeling burnt out. This can be a result of the second sign that you have poor boundaries, difficulty saying no. People with poor boundaries sometimes find it difficult to say no even when necessary. This leads to being overwhelmed with commitments and obligations, which can lead to the third sign that you have difficulty maintaining boundaries, feelings of resentment. If you have poor boundaries, you might find yourself feeling resentful of people or situations because you're constantly doing things that you don't want to do. And over time, that builds resentment. You might also find yourself being resentful of people that are able to maintain healthy boundaries. I've seen this happen mostly in the workplace, where people seem to be resentful of individuals that are able to maintain good work-life balance. And it's most commonly displayed by the fourth sign that you might have poor boundaries, passive-aggressive comments. Things like, "It must be nice to leave the office at 4:59, can be a sign that you have poor boundaries or that you have difficulty communicating your boundaries, especially at work. Finally, if you're constantly feeling overwhelmed, that might be a sign that you have poor boundaries. People that feel overwhelmed feel like they've lost control in various aspects of their life. And if this is the case for you, that might be a sign that you might benefit from developing stronger boundaries. So here is a 3-step process that you can use to build stronger boundaries. First, it's important for you to determine your boundaries. It takes a little bit of self-awareness and self-reflection for you to start to understand what is or is not okay with you across a variety of situations. But that time investment is well worth it for you to determine what are your boundaries. The second step is for you to communicate those boundaries. You need to communicate those boundaries that you have determined to people in the relevant areas of your life. Part of effective communication is being specific and being concise. Consider making your delivery matter-of-fact rather than overly personal or emotional. Remember, you've thought this through, you have your reasons, and your goal here isn't to punish anyone, but only to protect yourself. Third is to execute and enforce your boundaries. Only enforcing your boundaries every once in a while is a form of what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, meaning that the person you're attempting to set a boundary with is never really sure if you're going to enforce or not enforce your boundaries. And this can actually make it more likely that the person will continue to attempt to violate your boundaries. So it's important that you maintain and enforce your boundaries as consistently as possible. Now, you might be thinking, I'm not even sure how to get through step 1. How can I determine what I want my boundaries to be? Well, determining your values is an excellent start. And this video right here walks you through several ways that you can use to determine your values.